Welcome to What is Going for new thought from the edge of Each week on OMTimes flagship radio show, veteran broadcaster, author, and media consultant Sandie conducts thought-provoking interviews with inspirational authors, artists, musicians, scientists, speakers, and filmmakers who are working at the point where spirituality and science meet consciousness at the very edge of Here is your host, Sandie Sedgbeer.
Hello. According to award-winning media composer, public speaker, and music and health innovator Gary Malkin, the very first sense we humans develop at roughly 16 weeks in utero is our listening sense. On the other end of life spectrum, hearing is the very last sense to go before we die. This suggests that vibrations and our ability to be affected by them can serve a meaningful role to keep us healthy and vital throughout our lives. Gary Malkin joins me now to discuss not what the future of healthcare looks like, but what it sounds like. Gary Malkin, welcome. Sorry to screw up your name there, Gary.
No, pleasure to be on with you, Sandie. Thank you so much.
Oh, it's lovely to have you here. Gary, you spent the first 20 years of your professional career creating original music for television and film, for socially responsible documentaries, commercials, video games. And then something happened that changed the entire trajectory of your career. Will you tell us about that?
Yeah, well, I think, Joseph Campbell calls it the fall in a hero's journey. But so I was at the top of my game and had a huge home and a wife and child and living really with the largest music production company in the Bay Area. And I had a bicycle accident, a plant into the concrete over the handlebars with my daughter, and thank God she only got scratched up, but I got badly damaged. And it was the beginning of an effective intervention that at the time was horrific, and looking back, I see now was in many ways a divine intervention for me to turn the course of my life into something that really fit my nature and my soul's journey much more directly, which is to be in service and to be utilizing music as a path to wake people up to what matters most. But what happened was I literally shattered my wrist in 18 pieces. I didn't know if I'd ever play the piano again. And here I am, like, recovering from the worst accident in my life, and find out that my wife wants to leave the marriage. So I had one of these summers of Job where everything and anything that could go wrong happened. And although it wasn't a physical death, it was an ego death of profound proportions. And everything that I had set up all fell apart. And at that time, I had just started the project called Graceful Passages, which was about setting spoken word messages of comforting, soothing, authentic, tender messages about accepting death from the wisdom keepers of our time. We did around 2 or 3 tracks with my co-creator, Michael Stillwater, and I literally shuddered before the accident, about a month or two, when I realized what will have to change in me vibrationally for me to be the portal through which something this intimate and profound could actually be effective in touching people towards, when they're facing literal or metaphoric loss. And sure enough, a month or two later, after I had that thought, this accident occurred. And I do believe that these things happen, they're kind of divinely orchestrated, and that was my initiation into death and loss. Thank God I didn't have to die doing it. But it really set me on a whole different course of realizing, what do I want to do with my life besides feeding the GDP of America by doing all the TV and commercials and the ego-edifying work. I wanted to do something that would make a difference in people's lives.
I want to come back to Graceful Passages later because, there's a lot more to discuss there. But first, I want to go back to the beginning because the seeds for all of this were there right from the start, weren't they? I mean, you were playing music at the age of 5, just, playing the piano by ear. The moment you touched the keys, you seemed to know your way around. And then you've said that from then on, it was the lens through which you experienced your life. Exactly. By the time you were 11, you had experienced Lawrence Rosenthal's remarkable soundtrack to the movie about Helen Keller's life, The Miracle Worker, and you knew that you had to become a film composer. So what was
Well,
it?
you really do study your people before you talk to them. That's amazing.
Absolutely. Always. Hours of study. I know everything about you, Gary. So tell me, what was it about Rosenthal's soundtrack that moved you so?
Oh, my God. You know, the fact that I was able to say to his eyes, right to his face, that you're the reason I became a film composer was one of the great thrills of my life. You know, that score, if you listen to the score to The Miracle Worker, that man created a musical soundtrack and an orchestration that really demonstrates how, in the hands of a master, you can create the subjective experience of an emotional realm of experiences, right? So he created this soundtrack that mimics what it might feel like to be shut out from the rest of all the senses that we have, and to be in an inner world that's completely isolated and disconnected from the rest of life. And he created this soundtrack so that the whole first half of the film, you're in this angst of feeling Helen Keller, but knowing that she does not feel anything other than her own darkness inside and disconnection. And then the breakthrough happens, and it's really, I love metaphor and I love symbolism, but there's so much in that movie, because the breakthrough that Helen Keller had in awakening to the ability to communicate with sign language is in some ways about a kind of a profile of the breakthrough that all of us are looking for in terms of deliverance, enlightenment, awakening, connection, shattering of the illusion of separation that is so rampant in our times today. So in that moment, I was, as an 11-year-old, was feeling isolated in ways that I didn't even know how to name, for being an unusually sensitive kid that wasn't in the normal, sine wave of, the normal curve of what a boy should be in the early 60s. And when I saw that breakthrough moment, I just, on so many levels, I had a transmission from the score but I also got that the constant undercurrent of life has to do with this pulsing energy that Lawrence Rosenthal was able to represent in the score. And when you think about what a soundtrack is, in a way, it's like the internal emotional undercurrent of all life. And if you can represent that with music in a way that awakens people to a deeper experience of emotion, my God, what a gift to humanity that is. So that's a little bit of my thoughts. I can talk a long time about that score.
Oh, well, it's just fascinating, because what I take from that is that, here you are as this child of 11 having this incredible emotional, evocative experience that sets you on your life path to be a composer and wanting to create scores like that. But at that time, you knew what you were feeling, but you had no idea, really, of how deep it goes and what music really does to us. I find fascinating.
Well, but at 8 years old, I was conducting Leonard Bernstein orchestras in the Den. I was listening to Leonard Bernstein on record, and I was imagining, these glorious fantasies of grandeur, like wanting to conduct. And so I actually was familiar with the orchestral palette, but the way that Lawrence Rosenthal and other film composers that I've fallen in love with since then were able to master the art of dropping into the kind of emotional DNA of an experience. And that really is the tip of an iceberg of what really is possible even today that we've barely scratched the surface for, that pretty much we use music for entertainment. But what if music and all its nuances could be used for what I've coined a phrase, innertainment, for the awakening of our inner lives in a way that becomes much more helps us awaken to the fact that we're spiritual beings on a human journey. And music can awaken us to that in a much more direct way that we've barely scratched the surface for in all the transitions we go through in our lives.
And it can do so much more than that. I mean, look at the way it can transform our emotions. I mean, I think about some film scores that, for me, just, I just words can't describe how I feel when I listen to certain film scores, when I listen to certain voices and the hair on the back of my neck stands on end. And now that we are beginning to understand about the healing power, what it does to our cells, our body cells, and how we can utilize it as medicine. I mean, it's just, for me, it takes music into something else beyond what I thought it was for most of my adult life.
Yeah, it's true. I mean, this brings me to the recognition of the beautiful phrase from India called Nada Brahma. And I'm about to start working on the score for the sequel to the movie Thrive, which is the most watched documentary in history. It's called Thrive, What on Earth Will It Take? And we're about to do Thrive, This Is What It Takes. And it's all going to be about the unified field. And what I'm excited about is I'm being challenged to create the music. What would the unified field sound like, right? As an embracing, mothering presence, right? Well, first, in order to go there, you got to go down to that core phrase, Nada Brahma, which 5,000 years ago, the Siddhis of India claim Nada Brahma, sound is God. And so you don't have to be a film composer or even a lover of film scores to appreciate that we are at our core vibration and frequency, and there are the whole universe. It's the common denominator. So the simplest way to access that is as simple as singing in the shower or oming and finding the place in your own body where you can go and just start feeling the massaging energy of you just toning a single note. And by doing that, you enter into the mystery of the common denominator vibration of the universe.
Yes.
So it's very simple and it's very profound and it's very accessible to everyone, really.
So when you were in that period of your life where you felt broken and everything that you knew that you'd relied on that was real in your life was beginning to crumble and leave you, how did you use music at that point to help yourself heal from that, physically and emotionally?
Well, remember I referenced that we had done a couple of tracks of Graceful Passages, which, again, was recording the voices of intimate, tender, authentic messages. And, again, I can't emphasize this enough, that tenderness is the vehicle, it's the viscous energy through which healing occurs. So when we started asking famous people like Desmond Tutu and Thich Nhat Hanh and Ram Dass and Elizabeth Kubler-Ross to speak as tenderly and authentically as they could, what we were doing without really knowing it was we were asking them to drop into a deeper vibrational frequency that was in touch with their souls, right? And so we started this process. We did around 2 or 3 tracks. As I said, something in me shuddered, what will have to die, and then this accident happened. Well, when it became clear that with a lot of physical therapy, I was going to be able to play piano again, during my healing period, I listened to these recordings that my co-creator, Michael Stillwater, and I were harnessing. And these, you're looking back, you think, who writes this script? It's like, who could possibly create this, I ended up mulling through these recordings of the most extraordinary nature of Ram Dass and Thich Nhat Hanh, Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, and other leading humanitarian leaders speaking around death and dying. And I was going through the greatest sorrow of my life with the breakup of my family, my wife leaving the family. That happened after the accident. And I was going through so much loss that the creation of Graceful Passages was my healing process. And that's why when you hear that music, you can really hear this incredible. It's like John O'Donohue talks about the beauty as the silent embrace. The ability to feel embraced by the beauty of these beautiful people's wisdom, their lifelong earned wisdom, embraced me in a cloak that made me know somehow that all was well, even though nothing felt like all was well at the time. And then I responded with that cracked heart, that famous phrase from Leonard Cohen that says, "Ring the bell that still can ring. There is no perfect offering. There is a crack in everything. That's how the light gets in." And in my cracked heart phase, the music that came out of me was uncannily first takes. I'd listen to the voice, we'd set up the voice and take out all the dross of the recordings that didn't feel essential. And then just these musical experiences, responses came out to these spoken word recordings. And really that empathy for what these people were saying saved my life, because it remembered me, it reconnected me to the best of my humanity, which was that cracked heart, And what Rumi talks about is the it's not arriving, it's the yearning that is the most profound human experience. And I was in this cracked open yearning, like, help me, God, help me, I'm lost. And ironically, that lost feeling creates such a incredible tenderness and a willingness to be the beginner, bless me, like through the eye of the needle kind of thing, So I don't know if I answered your question, but that's the best I could do.
Well, I'm having all these visuals as we're speaking, and I cannot imagine that there could be anything more perfect to get you through that kind of loss and grief and pain and sorrow than music.
Right.
Nothing else, I think, would do it.
Well, Sandie, it's really ironic because, we always know this goes in layers. It's not like you go through your loss and then you're perfect, right, and done. I'm going through another turn of the wheel right now. I hear music, so I probably should wind it up.
Yeah. Yes, the music is always a sign, isn't it? You're listening to What Is Going On. I'm Sandie Sedgbeer. My guest today is 7 times Emmy award-winning composer, performer, public speaker, and music and health innovator Gary Malkin, who's dedicated to redefining music's role in health.
The future of Internet radio is here. OMTimes Radio. IOM FM.
Ascending Hearts is no ordinary dating site, but a spiritual dating site with a purpose, to link you with your soulmate. We engineer the serendipity so you can trust that you will attune with someone that has the same matching vibration as you. Ascending Hearts, the conscious dating site for the spiritually aware. Try Ascending Hearts for free. AscendingHearts.com.
More than 24 million Americans have an autoimmune disorder, and that number continues to grow. I'm Sharon Saylor, and I'm one of those 24 million. To put that number in perspective, cancer affects about 9 million and heart disease up to 22 million. That's why I've brought together top experts and those thriving regardless of their diagnosis to bring you the latest, most up-to-date information. Join me, Sharon Saylor, Friday night, 7 p.m. Eastern, for the Autoimmune Hour on Life Interrupted Radio to find out how to live your life uninterrupted.
I'm Fidel Nsombo. I was born in a city called Bukavu in the Congo. We were a loving family, and then, boom, everything that I had disappeared in a single day. People think that when you are a refugee and they resettle you to America, and all your problems are done. They don't understand that that's the beginning of everything. I was not born a refugee. I was made one.
It's time we welcome refugee families with open arms. Learn more at embracerefugees.org, brought to you by the Ad Council.
Welcome back. Gary Malkin, over the last 20 or so years, Graceful Passages has received global acclaim as a truly life-generative work. It was described by a leading hospice professional as in this way, that Graceful Passages is the most powerful non-pharmacological intervention I'm aware of for alleviating anxieties and fears while facing life-threatening illness or the end-of-life process. Now, what we're discovering is that, music does so much more than just alleviate anxieties and fears, transform emotions. I mean, it can literally help us, recover from all kinds of physical ailments, etc. What does the latest research show us with regard to how sound and music interventions can lessen physical pain as well as emotional and spiritual suffering?
Well, it's really an extraordinary time to be alive. Right now, we are experiencing what I call a quantification renaissance, the likes of which we have never seen before, around the power of many, many different modalities related to music, sound, and vibrational frequencies. So these days, if you just Google, the different studies that have come out, there's a wealth of studies that have demonstrated that people are using not just music therapy, although music therapy is one of the fastest growing modalities that has a lot of acceptance by the insurance companies that's remunerated, but more and more hospitals are now including multiple modalities of sound healing, sound practitioners, different forms of music therapy, and multiple ways that music ends up becoming a healing force. But many of the studies have shown just at every spectrum, it alleviates pain, it can lessen hospital stays, it can deal with emotional and spiritual suffering, which is the precursor to physical pain. I mean, it goes on and on. Well, one of the things that's also exciting that I'm not directly involved with, because I'm more interested in the aesthetic, emotional, and spiritual aspects of creating an ecology or an ecosystem inside the human being and inside the environments in which we relate to one another that will enhance our capacity to be more present, more what I call heart-centered, mindful, more heartful, more empathic, more compassionate. But there's a lot of new things happening now that are bursting on the scene that are actually demonstrating that when you find the right vibrational frequency of an organ, for example, or of a cancer cell, they have this extraordinary, we're in the early stages of demonstrating that you can actually zap different cancer cells with different vibrational frequencies, and it will destroy the cancer cells more effectively than chemotherapy, Yes. And we're still, because it hasn't been taken to the level that it takes $1 billion or something, how much? It takes millions of dollars to create these studies that rival the studies that all the pharmaceutical companies do, which makes it an untenable and unsustainable situation for these early emerging things that deserve to be paid attention to. But we are starting to really, really see that just getting yourself slowed down enough to allow the innate capacity of the humans yearning for coherence, that word is a really important word, the homeostasis of the heart, body, mind, spirit, we're seeing that the human capacity for self-healing gets accelerated with the right conditions that sound and music can support.
I was watching a YouTube video just a couple of weeks ago. Anthony Holland, who's an associate professor and director
of music technology. That's exactly what I was thinking of, yes.
That's the one, yes, where he was literally showing how cancer cells were just being exploded by the right frequency. I mean, this is astonishing. And the thing about it is, there's nothing new about it. I mean, we've been using, yes, and way back before then, Pythagoras, indigenous cultures have used music for healing purposes since time immemorial.
It's so true. I more and more, I believe under the surface of the mainstream, the whole plant medicine community that has disseminated throughout the world, there's this whole, growing appreciation for the kind of the work that ayahuasca and other forms of plant medicine are having on people's consciousness, and it's gaining acceptance. And even in studies, people are showing that if you use certain kinds of mushrooms, psilocybin, even little bits of LSD and plant medicine, that they can be supported for illness, for cancer, for end of life. And what I was going to bring up was, when I've done plant medicine journeys, I couldn't imagine having the experience without having the drum and the chant in the background as kind of a tether to the world, right?
Yes.
When you're in a state of expanding your consciousness to explore the outer realms of what your soul wants to receive from the dreams of your future life, whatever, the sound becomes the most comforting and tangible anchor to being in both worlds, if you will, being a spiritual being on a human journey. And it's just remarkable how ancient, it's all validating what we've known, like you said, for hundreds of thousands of years.
This raises some really interesting philosophical questions. I mean, if we think about the Bible, in the beginning was the Word, the sound. If we think of ourselves as sparks of source, sparks of God, sparks of all that is, then sound is something that is so, we can't be separated from it. And I would say that sound is probably one of the most, powerful things that we can experience. And our body must be so familiar with it. The way we resonate to sound, the way the hairs on the back of our neck will stand up. I've heard it said that if that happens to you, then the frequency that you're hearing, is in perfect resonance with you. I don't know if that's true or not, but some voices can do it, some sounds can do it, others can't. But it begs all these questions about sound, right. That have never been answered, that we can't answer.
Well, I've particularly utilized the nature of sound to what I call one of the greatest epidemics of our time. I jokingly have said that nobody takes things seriously unless you call it a syndrome. So I created my own syndrome called awareness fragmentation syndrome. Mm-hmm. And in a similar way to how they describe the soil of many many farming communities, that it's 50% or less nutritious of nutritive soil than it was 50 years ago, for example. I believe that humans' ability to be attentive to the nuance of heart wisdom, intellectual wisdom, is the one that's most prevalent, but the heart wisdom and the soul wisdom and the body wisdom is also often subservient to the linear, rational obsession with, like, the only thing that's credible is when it's linear and it's using cognitive capacity, which often is moving at a lot faster speed than the other wisdoms, right? And I found that of all the art forms that has a powerful catalytic effect to addressing this syndrome, which is essentially a fragmentation and a sublimation of the wisdom of our hearts, our bodies, our souls. Each of us have different preferences. Me, I often spent a lifetime shunning distancing myself from my body and focusing on my heart. I was a walking heart most of my life, right? So now I'm dealing with having to bring awareness into my body at a level that I didn't even know I wasn't paying attention to, right? But all of us have different profiles in that way. But sound, and particularly sound that slows us down, and that is in coherence, brings us to homeostasis. This is the most powerful tool that can awaken and address this fragmentation that is really causing a massive disturbance on a global level. It's the reason why we are where we are with climate change. It's the reason why there's so much tribalism and nationalism. It's because people are so cut off from their heart wisdom and their body wisdom and their soul wisdom that they think they're human doings and human thinkings rather than human beings. So my goal, my life's mission, is how can we work together to create musical and sound solutions that can catalyze an integration and a respect for the other forms of wisdom that are essential to our humanity. And so that's my big soapbox. That's my huge mission in life, is really addressing the monopoly that the linear rational mind has taken a hold of most of us and made us much speedier and less connected and integrated to our fullness. So yeah, that's something I'm very passionate about.
I can tell. Music really has, moved you through life in so many different directions. I mean, now you do keynotes, workshops, webinars, performances, all of which are focused on the importance of using the vibrationally efficient strategies of music and sound to transmit more direct integrative experiences.
Oh, that sentence was beautiful. I'm glad you recorded that.
I took that directly from something that was written about you, and it was so true, because it really does sum up what you do. I know that you're passionately dedicated to sharing ways that, you know, these strategies can awaken, inspire, and connect us. There are a number of workshops that you offer. I have done so much research on you, I could talk to you for probably a week without stopping, but we have to, you know, narrow this down. There are two of your workshops that I would like to talk about. One is engaging the unified field through the power of music. Tell me more about that.
Well, it's actually very much in process, because that's related to the film score I'm about to create for Thrive, which is going to be all about the unified field, right? But a lot of so that workshop around dropping into the quantum field really is very much related to what I was talking about slowing down enough to allow our beings, our mitochondria at a cellular level, to affect our gene expression, which often has to do with this sense of coming back into coherence and wholeness with our cells and slowing down. And often what's in the way of that kind of quantum sensory connection is the accumulated losses that we have not assimilated. And we live in a perfect storm in the culture that denies loss, illness, death, and sickness as something to avoid, and so it becomes this accumulated experience that is a shared, like what Barbara Marx Hubbard calls the noosphere. We are living in a context in which the noosphere is filled with the accumulated losses of the living beings and also the ancestors of this endless amounts of unassimilated loss. And the Native American teacher I work with, his name is Archon Lushwala. Deer and Thunder is his book that's extraordinary. He talks about you must go all the way down and deep. Don't wander and belabor it, but go down deep into the losses, release them, and then don't belabor them. Don't stay long in them, and then let go, and then move into this humble surrender into relationship with the wholeness of nature. And so a lot of the process that we're going to be offering in November of 2020 is a Grateful Passages workshop that will really address the role that loss and unassimilated loss has in preventing us from accessing our place in connection with the quantum field. And that often becomes one of the greatest stumbling blocks to actually becoming, because once we're clear of those things, Sandie, what happens is we naturally adhere to our innate connection to the interdependence of all life. That's when we start becoming connected in the way that Joe Dispenza talks about, with dropping in and just, really having the power of your mind and your heart in alignment with really creating outcomes that can change your future, right? But a lot of people can't go there yet until they explore a lot of the places where they're holding on to unexpressed loss. So that's a little peek into the work that the Quantum Sensory Workshop is involved with, and a lot of it has to do with slowing down. And a lot of people are afraid of silence and slowing down, so we use music as a buttress for that, as a training wheel for slowing down, because a lot of people need to go in stages,
You have a CD for stillness, don't you?
Yeah. Autumn Stillness is one of the best, and also the Divine Nine. It's called All Is Well on the website. It was tuned with this thing called Divine Nine tuning that just brings people to deep states of inner stillness. And again, that's my goal. Is I really want to create ways to make it easier for people to meditate in a way that doesn't make them existentially afraid of that quiet aloneness with themselves. So we create tracks that surround people in an energetic that feels inviting and beautiful and embraced, like that silent embrace. So Donahue talks about a lot of where we need to go is addressing the millions of people that have known now that mindfulness extends life, but they don't know how to get there. They don't have to cross into that, over that threshold. And I think that music and sound has a role to play for millions. The way that Shavasana played at the end of the yoga class. Yes. Well, 30, 40 years of Shavasana has implanted what I believe is now the current mindfulness movement. And I believe the next step is the mindfulness movement is implanting the revolution of the heart-centered living. And that's what is the gateway to quantum sensory living as well. So this is it's these constant onion skins that we're revealing and releasing and allowing as we evolve together as a species. And I'm so excited about the work that all the people you bring to the world, and I love being a part of that in some way.
You know, I've always wanted to ask a composer this question. What is it like when you sit down to create a new piece of music? I mean, what is that process? How does it come through?
Well, my favorite current performance opportunity is if you ever come to San Francisco on a Tuesday night at 6:15 in the largest cathedral west of the Mississippi, Grace Cathedral. There's this extraordinary human experiment called Yoga at the Labyrinth at Grace Cathedral. And I'm one of the resident musicians. About 6 times a year I play piano and voice, filling every crevice of this massive cathedral, right? And what I'm thinking about when you ask that question is that I get to create the fabric, the soundtrack, within which this yoga class, which people ages from like 16 to 86 are doing, all cultures, all generations, and they're all filling the pews, and there's 800 people in this cathedral doing yoga. It's such a uniquely San Francisco experience because we're such a liberal community, But I think of what happens when I start playing in that context, in that sacred context, and it's so beyond a performance. It's like I get to create the air within which people breathe and do the yoga asanas. It's such a privilege. And what I'm thinking about is, in response to your question, is it always starts with a humble surrender, a willingness, God, utilize me as a portal of your light, and just when I surrender and I open and I breathe, suddenly then it becomes a feeling, an emotion, and it's this some range in the color of beauty, like the full range. And something comes in as an emotion, and then I'll play one note, and it will guide me into something that becomes an emotional tapestry that I'm as surprised by as everyone else in the room, just because the goal is for me to be a portal. So when I'm composing for a film score, it's not that different. That's why I love looking at films without any music or any temp music, because when you look at films, I suggest this to the audience, go ahead and look at one of your favorite movies and turn down the sound completely, and look at the images and feel what language emotionally would support those images, and how different it would be if the soundtrack was different than it ended up being. It's a fascinating thing, and it gives you a little window into what it's like to create music for film, because it could be anything, right? It's amazing.
That's beautiful, Gary. You're listening to What Is Going On. I'm Sandie Sedgbeer, and I'm speaking with award-winning media composer, public speaker, and music and health innovator, Gary Malkin, about sound, music, and the future of healthcare. We'll be back with more from Gary Malkin after this break.
The cutting edge of conscious radio, OMTimes Radio, IOM-FM. Being a radio host on IOM-FM allows you to build your show on a rich platform with the power of the internet to fulfill your outreach goals and connect with a very specialized and global online audience, unlimited by time and distance. OMTimes Radio will provide you with web relevance, a recognizable conscious brand, and with the standard of excellence that has accompanied every single OMTimes endeavor. Host your show with OMTimes Radio Network.
Hello, I'm Lisa Berry. Join me every Monday at 1 p.m. Eastern Time for Light on Living, a chance to see new, hear different, and feel more as I shine the spotlight on all the ways to lighten the load of life's challenges. Light on Living is your link to that new way you're looking for, that new understanding that will enhance your life, and that positive connection that will support your growth. So join me, and you'll gain insight and start to see things in a new way that motivates you.
Imagine being fired because of who you love. Imagine being denied medical treatment because of who you marry. Imagine being evicted because of who you are. Millions of Americans don't have to imagine this. They have to live it. Because in 31 states, it's legal to discriminate against LGBT people. Get the facts at beyondido.org. Brought to you by the Gill Foundation and the Ad Council.
Welcome back. Gary Malkin, you founded Alchemical Wisdom. What is the purpose of that, and what do you mean by the phrase alchemical wisdom?
Oh, God, one of my favorite subjects. Well, you know, I, growing up as a sensitive kid that wore my heart on my sleeve, I was always feeling isolated, that everybody was covering up their feelings. And so when Brene Brown came up with vulnerability as the birthplace of our emotional authenticity and our innocence and our vibrancy as human beings, that we live longer when we're vulnerable and transparent, I swear to God, I felt like I died and went to heaven, because I finally found a social researcher that validated my whole life story, because I felt rather alone in that. And so music became the lens through which I was living my life, you know, out loud and vulnerable and transparent always. And sometimes it was dicey. It was hard, right? So the Alchemical Wisdom format got born when we started interviewing these humanitarian and visionary leaders for the Graceful Passages Project. But we went on to other projects that really used that format, and I developed the term because what I really was fascinated with was, given the fact that we live in a culture that is so pejorative towards sincerity and vulnerability and heart-opened, you know, transparency, what would it be like if we could reinvigorate integrity and depth and connection and meaning to our authenticity, and do that in a way that allows our words to not be empty words of just linear rational thought, but words that are imbued with emotional intent in a way that can reclaim the emotional heritage and intention of words. That's not the right word, heritage, but to address this awareness fragmentation issue that I've been talking about. So what I found was, when you got people to speak, really everyone has this capacity. You don't have to be a wisdom keeper to do this. But when you got people to speak from their depths and from skin in the game, you know, like really speaking the tenderness of their truth. If Jesus Christ walked on the planet today and started speaking from the tenderness of his truth, I think most people would ignore it, because everybody's too busy texting and emailing and not even assuming that there'll be the emotional depth connection. People have become inured to even noticing when something is more connected, right? What if there was a way to use the power of sound and music, and particularly the art of film scoring, to reawaken people's understanding of what was behind the words emotionally, that enables people to get tuned back into the wholeness of our words as connected to our hearts and souls rather than just words. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. Absolutely, it makes sense.
So that's what alchemical wisdom, the alchemy between words when they're rewoven into the intention of our emotional and spiritual relationship to what we're trying to convey. And I just fall in love. I have an archive of 120 wisdom keepers, including Desmond Tutu and Christian Northrup and Joan Borisenko and people from other countries. And I have these unedited recordings. We still are looking for the funding, and we have a cool nonprofit that's going to be bequeathed these recordings before I die. Actually, they're going to be responsible for these. It's about 600 hours of intimate, authentic, tender messages from these wisdom keepers, so that after my passing, these can be a gift to humanity. And hopefully someone will pick up the ball, if I don't do it, to score some of them, so they become like messages in a bottle from people of integrity and wholeness that can remind us, what does it sound like when the human voice is not corrupted by the fragmentation, the new norm of our fragmentation of our current culture today. That's what alchemical wisdom is about, reclaiming the wholeness and remembering, reconnecting us to who we really are and what matters most.
You know, I spent a good part of this afternoon listening to samples of tracks of your music, and especially graceful passages. And so I got to hear some of those people, you know, and those words against the backdrop of your music. And it was so powerful and so enjoyable just to be able to sit and do nothing and feel good about doing nothing, because I'm actually listening to your music.
See, that's the key. If there's any objective of all of this stuff we're talking about for this whole call, it's what you just said, Sandie, which is sitting and doing quote-unquote nothing and allowing yourself to be receptive and receive. It's such a rare thing today for people to do that, and that alone is such a gift that you've said that. I love that you said that. And, you know, Saturday night we're doing a really exciting thing. In San Francisco and New York, there's this thing called Reimagine End of Life, and it's 10 days of 250 events of all kinds, panel discussions, and it's all about reinventing the way we approach end of life. And it's a massive cultural event in San Francisco.
Wow.
And Saturday night we're doing a sound bath. I'm orchestrating with a sound healer, bowls and gongs and didgeridoo and all these things, and I'm taking some of these voices from Graceful and we're dropping them in like pebbles in a pond around these massive, beautiful sounds. So it's a whole new experiment in how we can cloak these words into sound experiences that will enable us to receive the words. So and then people are going to lie down on their yoga mats and wrap themselves in blankets in a beautiful temple, and we're going to try that as a way to absorb this content. So I love that you said sitting there doing nothing and not feeling guilty about it.
Oh, no, not at all. I mean, it was wonderful, and I'd encourage anybody to go find them and listen to them as well. But it's, you know, it's not just about that transition, because you've also worked at the other end. You've created the celebration of new life,
Yes.
you know, which is for women in the pre and perinatal period, for the well-being of the infant and the family. Tell us a little bit about that.
Oh, God, I just love that I'm able to talk about this with you. It's so great. Well, when you look about it, it all depends on what birth looks like. I mean, death is like birth into another dimension, right? And death is, and birth is like a death into another dimension as well. Or a birth, it's all birthing. It's all dying. It's you know, it's all this connection of dying, birthing is one thing. You know, fall down, get up. You know, I die, I'm born. So we, my partner in the celebration of new life category, Lisa Raffel, sound healer extraordinaire, and you know, actress and a writer. She and I and her husband wrote the book called Safe in the Arms of Love, Deepening the Essential Bond with Your Baby. And one of the things that we became really entranced by is there was this woman named Julie Gerland who created the United Nations prenatal initiative, Heaven on Earth prenatal initiative, I think it's called. And it was basically postulating that if every woman that was pregnant was designated as a sacred space, so that there was nutrition at every level, emotional, spiritual, and physical, then in 50 years, every child would have the anatomy of the brain that looked through the eyes of the universe as a friendly place. Because anatomically, when babies are coming to term with any kind of serious stress, emotionally, nutritionally, physically, spiritually, it creates the fight-flight and anatomy of a perspective in the child that looks at the world when it's born as an unfriendly place, as a place that is threatening. And there's science to designate this. It's absolutely clear. So we thought if we could use music to help parents deepen the bond from as early as the moment conception begins, even in the womb as well as after the womb, that after birth, that we would have another contributing factor to how we can change the world to create a place where there wasn't all this gun violence and, more importantly, this epidemic of isolation and depression. People are feeling so isolated and alone, and a lot of studies have shown that people who are not bonded, which is, by the way, 90% of us, aren't comfortable in our own skin or in our own sense of, separateness in the world. Yes. So we wanted to work it at both ends. I'm working on how we can approach ending our lives with more dignity and acceptance and mindfulness and compassion, and also the beginning of life is crucial to setting up the matrix of consciousness from the very earliest stages of coming to term, that is held in the arms of love and developed with a sense of all is well and that we're comfortable in our own skin and we're welcomed. And so one of the things I'm really excited about is that we're just putting in the finishing touches of a musical that we're hoping will go to Broadway. It's called Can You Hear Me, Baby? And it really is all about shining a light on the power and the importance and the value of women having the opportunity to choose for themselves the kind of birth that they want to give. And it's not about proselytizing or making natural birth be better or worse. It's about bringing awareness to the fact that it all matters and that every baby deserves to be loved and cherished and desired. And that would have a massive impact on our planet and on our world.
Massive. There's another form of birthing that I want to talk to you about before we have to bring the show to an end, and that is birthing your emergent self into being through the healing power of song, which is one of the workshops you do, the prayer song process. And that really caught my eye because you're talking about, the voice and people using their voice, and so many people are afraid that they can't use their voice because they don't have a good voice. They haven't been taught to sing. Say a few words about that.
Well, I'm so glad you brought it up because actually it is the thing I love doing most of all. I offer it either live in groups of 20 to 200, but I also do it as a private Zoom session for people that want to have this 90-minute experience. And you can find out about that at info@wisdomoftheworld.com or staff at wisdomoftheworld.com. But what it is when we can identify through our most precious spiritual guidance, what is that one thing that we still have challenge with? It could be that you're always late. It could be that you're judging yourself. If you're in a human body, you're generally facing some issue that continues to challenge your ability to feel whole and complete. And we find that piece, and we ask you to listen to if your favorite spiritual guide, whether it's Mary or your grandmother or a tree or a dog, what would that prayer be if that being could make a prayer for you to be in deliverance of that habit? And the prayer comes in a short form, and I shape with you this prayer into an actual song that becomes a talismanic companion for your life that helps you emerge out of, it's all based on the belief that a prayer sung is a prayer with wings. And so what happens is whether you can think you sing or not, I guide you into taking your very own prayer for yourself into a song that becomes something that, we record, and you have it as a recording, and many people have said that they sing it and play it every day. A friend said after a year that they came back to me and they said, my life has changed because I don't have this concern anymore. So it's a way of taking the affirmation power of affirmation, but also the power of prayer and the power of desire, of yearning, putting it into a prayer song, your very own prayer song. And it's also, when we do it in groups, it's also about demonstrating the importance of reclaiming our innocence. There's something about our innocence as a doorway into our ability to feel connected to one another on the human journey. And I love doing prayer song processes with people. It's one of my favorite things to do.
Well, and the power of the intention that goes into that. I mean, that's got everything, hasn't it? And then you're using your own voice as well.
I'd like to offer you, Sandie, a gift free of charge. I'm going to give you, if you want one, a prayer song process so that you can experience it for yourself. So we've got to arrange something. If you're interested, I'd love to do it for you.
I would love to do that. I think that would be an incredible experience. Gary, we're almost out of time. I'm kind of lost for words because, as I say, this, if you could see the sheet of questions that I've got for you, you'd probably run away. But
the one thing I do want to say as a plug is one of the most exciting thing is the thing I'm doing with Sarah McCrum.
I was just going to ask you that one.
Well, because it's the what do you call it? It's the zenith point of all the alchemical wisdom I've done, and all of the heart-centered wisdom, heart-centered mindfulness music I've done, and all of it has emerged into this one expression called transformance. Global transformance. Sarah McCrum, one of the world's leading, she's changed my life. I adore her. She's one of my dear friends, but she's also one of my most important teachers, sarahmccrum.com. And she and I have found that we have this relationship to her spontaneous language and me spontaneous music, and we erupt together in these gorgeous combinations of transmissions of music and spoken word that are profoundly healing, and we're translating them into other languages for the Russian and hopefully other audiences. And I just invite people to we're still forming the website, so it's not fully done yet, but it's transformance.global, and you must find out about it because they're absolutely, they're very precious, and my relationship to Sarah is probably one of the most beautiful things that's evolved in my life recently. So I'm so glad I got that in there. Thank you.
I'm glad you did too, because I did want to ask you about that, and I love Sarah McCrum. We'll be hearing a lot more about her, from her, on this show in the year to come. Gary Malkin, we are out of time. It has been an absolute pleasure to speak with you. You have to come back again and again and again. And thank you.
Thank you so much, Sandie. It was a pleasure.
Thank you. So for more information about Gary Malkin, his many incredible projects, workshops, compositions, and just about everything else, visit wisdomoftheworld.com. I'm Sandie Sedgbeer. Thank you for joining me today, and I look forward to being with you at the same time next week. Till then, it's goodbye from me.